Audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, sir. A very good afternoon to all. So the Scientific Committee of 23rd IPS wanted to have topic that could clarify concepts and form strong foundations for our PG students in particular and all prostho in general. So dental implant surfaces is one such topic that is continuously evolving even as we talk. It is a great pleasure to have Dr. Aparna, who shall throw more light on dental implant surfaces and evolution. To chair this session, we have Dr. Anjali Bhagar and Dr. Harinder Kukreja.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So, Dr. Anjali Bhagar is currently working as the professor in Sharad Pawar Dental College, Wardha, Maharashtra. She has completed BDS and MDS in prosthodontics and crown and bridge and implantology from Nagpur University. Ma'am has completed her postgraduate diploma in hospital and healthcare management as well as in clinical research from Symbiosis Pune, Maharashtra, India. Madam is currently pursuing MPhil Health Professional Education at Datta Megha Institute of Medical Science, Maharashtra. She has conducted various workshops, courses all over the country. She also has been a co-author for many of the chapters and textbook of oral and maxillofacial surgery by Rajiv M. Borle. She has numerous national and international publications to her credit. And our next chairman, Dr. Harinder Kukreja, he has completed his BDS and MDS in prosthodontics from Government Dental College, Amritsar. Ma'am is currently serving as a professor and head of department prosthodontics at BJS Dental College and Hospital, Ludhiana. In November 2014, the Digilab integrated Noble Procera 2G scanner and software into clinical lab for CAD/CAM ceramic and implant prosthesis. She underwent implant mini residency from NSCA Institute, USA in 2015. She has been trained with Professor Dr. Polomolo for all-on-4 implant protocols, has many publications in the various national and international journals to her credit. Now over to you, Dr. Aparna. Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Just a minute, I'm having a little bit of a technical issue here.
No problem, ma'am.
Not able to change my slides for some reason. Yeah, very good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for your kind introduction. I bring warm greetings from Manipal Academy of Higher Education. At the very outset, I would like to thank the entire organizing team of the 23rd IPS PG Convention and Dr. Narendra Padiyar in particular for extending a kind invitation to deliver a lecture on dental implant surfaces and evolution. Now, before I commence the lecture, I would like to mention here that the focus of my lecture would be only on surfaces pertaining to titanium dental implants. Now, we know that the history and evolution of dental implants, it's a rich and a fascinating travelogue through time. We all know that dental implants have proven to have predictable and reliable therapeutic effects. Most of us have already placed implants. And dental implants now is one of the most sought after options for replacement of missing teeth. Well, I think no talk goes without appreciation to Professor Brahmamark and his co-workers. So thanks to Professor Brahmamark and co-workers, and most importantly, thanks to his concept of osseointegration, which has had a dramatic influence on the clinical treatment of oral implants. Now let's go through the various generations of surfaces, like how the surfaces have evolved over the years. Now, the first generation of successfully used titanium implants were termed as machined implants. They were also termed as turned implants. Now, these implants typically had a very smooth surface, and this was one of the initial implants that were initial surfaces that were brought into the market. And this implant now approaches more than 50 years in clinical use. Now, since then, implant surface has long been recognized to play an important role in molecular interactions and cellular response and osseointegration. So these kind of belong to the first generation of implants. Later on, the researchers developed the second generation implants with surfaces that can accelerate and improve implant osseointegration. And this was typically done because, later on we had the concept of immediate loading, so on and so forth. So we had the implants that underwent mechanical blasting, we had implants that underwent acid etching, we had implants that had bioactive coatings, implants were anodized and laser modified. So now we have considerable research that is being carried out, and we have surface engineering with micro and nanotechnology that represents the next generation of oral implant system. Now, why are the surfaces important? What is the significance of these surfaces? Now, all of us have placed implants, and we know that any implant that is placed typically osseointegrates. That has not been so much of an issue unless and until the patient has had some kind of a medical condition. Remember, osseointegration per se is not linked to any one particular surface characteristic, as almost all surfaces would exhibit osseointegration. However, it is important for us to remember that a stronger or a weaker bone response may be related to the surface phenomena. So that is why understanding or learning about surfaces is so important. And it becomes more pertinent in today's time, especially with your immediate implantation and your immediate loading protocols. So the main objective for designing a surface is to improve the long-term success of osseointegration and to accomplish an uncomplicated prosthetic replacement. So when we speak about successful osseointegration, what are we talking about? So we are basically talking about a bone to implant contact. Now, there are three strategies that are proposed by investigators, which tell us the various mechanism of action of these surfaces, which also speaks about how these surfaces have, kind of evolved over the years. If you look at the first strategy was to basically improve the interface physically by making alterations in the surface topography. This was something like your ablative surfaces. So now at the micrometer level, what happens is that the surface appears highly developed as compared to the smooth surface. It increases the bone anchorage, and it also reinforces the biomechanical interlocking. Now, what does this strategy do at the nanometer level? So at the nanometer level, what happens is that the roughness, it increases the surface energy, it improves the matrix protein absorption, improves the bone cell migration, as well as the proliferation. Now let's go into the strategy 2. Now what happens in strategy 2 is that this is something similar to our implants which are coated by hydroxyapatite implants. So in this strategy, there is an interface which is improved chemically by incorporating inorganic phases such as calcium phosphate. So what does this do? It basically stimulates bone regeneration and increases biomechanical interaction. Now going on to the third strategy, which is the strategy 3. Now, improvisation in the bone implant contact in this strategy is by incorporating organic molecules, such as proteins or enzymes and peptides, to induce specific cell and tissue responses. So basically, these are the newer generation of implants that are still being tested, and we do not have sufficient clinical evidence to say that they're actually capable of bringing about a better osseointegration. Now, before we discuss or we go on to the various surfaces, now let us understand a little about surface roughness. Now, surface roughness has been identified as a very important parameter for implant and for its capacity for being anchored in the bone tissue. Now, what is the surface roughness? What does it represent? It basically represents the mean height of the peaks and the pits. Whenever there is a surface roughness, you have a trough and you have, a peak. So this basically represents the mean height of the peaks and the pits or the trough. Now, commercially available implants have surfaces that have been characterized according to their roughness into 4 different groups. We have the smooth surface, wherein the value is less than 0.5 micron. Then we have the minimally rough surfaces, wherein the surface roughness is between 0.5 and 1 micron. Then you have the moderately rough surface, which has a surface roughness of 1 to 2 micron. And then you have the really rough surface, the roughest of all, which has a surface roughness of more than 2 micron. So now let's go on to the various surfaces. Due to paucity of time, I'm just going to touch upon these surfaces. I won't have sufficient time to discuss them in detail. Now, we can broadly classify these surfaces based on whether they have undergone ablation, wherein the material is removed from the titanium shank. That is, there's nothing added onto the titanium shank. You're doing some process onto the titanium shank, and portions of the titanium itself is removed, which is an ablative technique, and surfaces that have an additional layer that is incorporated on it, which is the additive technique. Okay, so basically we have the ablative technique and we have the additive techniques. So let's start with the ablative techniques. So starting with the first implant surface now, which is called the machine surface. Like I mentioned earlier, the machine surface is also termed as a turned implant. Now that is typically because the implant go through a turning process. Okay, so there is, even though the surface appears relatively smooth, to your naked eye, when you subject it to a scanning electron microscopic analysis, you will see grooves and ridges, which is created by the manufacturing process. So these grooves and ridges in the machined implants are not deliberately made by the manufacturers. Because of the manufacturing process, because of the turning process that it has undergone, you see these grooves and these ridges. So the surface topography is affected by a number of things, like you have the manufacturing tools that you're using to kind of get these implants into shape, or the bulk material, that is the material that your implant shank is made up of, or even the lubricating fluid that is used, and also the speed at which the machine is turned. Now, it's important for us to understand that, and it's important for us to remember that the machine surface was originally described by Bramah. But one disadvantage of the machine surface is that, regarding the morphology of the non-threaded machine implants, is the surface defects that you see on the surface of the implant. They provide resilience to bone interlocking, which delays the process of osseointegration as a result of the osteoblastic growth along the already existing surface grooves. So the technique that was described by Danemark, which is burying the implant followed by a 6-month healing before loading, helps in improving the clinical outcome for this type of implant. Now going on to the next implant surface, this is also an ablative technique. Now this is called the sand-blasted surface. Now the roughness can be achieved by basically blasting the implant shank with sand or grit particles. Now they have tried different gritting agents like aluminum oxide, or titanium oxide, or bioceramic particles. And they've also used various particle sizes like 25 micron, 75 micron, and 250 micron. So typically what happens is that you have the implant, you have a threaded implant, and you have these gritting agents that are blasted on the surface of this implant. So what does it do? It typically leaves a crater. That means portion of the implant is removed in that area. It's leaving a small crater. So the surface roughness that you get by sandblasting is dependent on a number of factors. It depends on the material that the implant is made up of, in this case, it's titanium. The size of the gritting agent, and not just the size, even the shape of the particles, the density of these particles, and as well as the speed at which these particles go and hit the implant. Now, when you observe a sandblasted surface, okay, under the scanning electron microscope, you see a lot of variability in the surface roughness. So basically, you have a surface that is totally anisotropic, consisting of craters and ridges, and it looks very, very irregular. But the most important thing that you might find, if you're lucky, is that you'll occasionally have, or you'll occasionally see residual sand particles that are embedded. So now the reason why the surface is anisotropic is because when the blasting cycle happens, when you start off the blasting cycle, that is the first cycle, you all have the sand particles with a typical, with a certain size. So once it is blasted, what happens? Because of the impact, the gritting particles tend to break. So when it goes through the second blasting cycle, the size of the sand that is hitting the implant shaft is much smaller, and so on and so forth. So every time you're subjecting the implant to a blasting cycle, the size of the particle that is used for blasting reduces in size, and because of which you have a very irregular and anisotropic surface. Is that clear? Now, I mentioned earlier that it's quite natural for you to find some embedded, sandblasting residual particles on the surface of the implant. Now, the fact that the sandblasting leaves residual particles may or might not be beneficial. Now, there are two schools of thought here. Like some researchers feel that the residue may impair bone formation by a competitive action to calcium, while some others feel that the residue may benefit the osseointegration. It can actually help in catalyzing the process. But nobody really knows what the problem is. But most of the researchers believe that the presence of these residual particles may impair the bone formation. So this is considered as one of the most important drawbacks as far as sandblasted implants is concerned. So in order to negate the problems associated with sandblasted implants, the researchers came up with the acid-etched implants. So the acid-etched surface is generally considered, minimally rough, and it's not as rough as the sandblasted surface. So typically they use a mixture of acids. So usually a mixture of nitric acid and hydrochloric acid, or a mixture of hydrochloric acid and sulfuric acid. These are the most commonly used solutions. And so the acid-etched surface was basically proposed to, primarily modify the implant surface without leaving residues found at the sandblasting surface. So acid etching, what does it do? It provides homogeneous irregularity, which obviously increases the surface area, and also it's proven to have enhanced bioadhesion. Now, the advantage of the acid etching is that they exhibit low surface energy, and most importantly, because it was developed after the sandblasting surface, it is supposed to reduce the possibility of contamination, because you don't have to really worry about any residual gritting agents or any residual particles that is remaining after the implant is treated with the acid. So it is said that acid-etched surfaces, it promotes rapid osseointegration. Now, going on to another surface, which is also an acid-etched surface. So this is called the dual edge surface. So dual edging is basically done to roughen the implant surface by immersing the titanium implants for several minutes in a mixture of concentrated hydrochloric acid and sulfuric acid, and it's not just immersed in the acids, but it's also heated above 100 degrees Celsius. So the dual etching creates a specific topography which enables them to attach to the fibrin scaffold, thereby guiding in the migration of the osteoblast onto the surface. So the dual edge surface, it intends to basically increase the nano roughness and the specific surface area, which in turn, is supposed to help in increasing the protein absorption and ultimately modulating the cell signaling. So then came a combination of the surfaces that we discussed, which is the sandblasted and the acid etched. So there was a combination. So the implants were first sandblasted, and then it was acid etched. So these implants are also termed as the SLA implants, and so these surfaces are basically first blasted by the sandblasting particles, and then subsequently it is etched by the acids. So what does this do? So it basically creates a dual surface roughness, and most importantly, you're expecting some residual, sand particles sticking over the surface of the implant because of the sandblasting. And this acid etching that is carried out after the sandblasting is done, it basically removes the embedded blasting particles. So you have a surface, which is first sandblasted and then it is acid etched. So what does the etching do? Okay, so when you have sandblasted, I told you initially itself that it creates very roughened area. You have peaks and you have bits that are. So when you're etching the already sandblasted area, it basically tends to tone down the heights of the peaks, which are created by sandblasting, and it also creates smaller pits. So basically, the average surface area is reduced. And researchers have also tried to improve the hydrophilicity of these conventional SLA implants, and they came up with the modified SLA implants, which were introduced as the SLActive implants. So how is this done? So what they did was they rinsed the SLA implant in a nitrogen atmosphere and stored it in a saline solution until installation. So this is supposed to reduce the carbon contamination, and what it also did was it improved the hydrophilicity of the implant. So this procedure basically allows SLActive to maintain a very chemically active surface, which is kind of conditioned to the human body. So the modified SLA implant is shown to significantly improve the bone apposition as compared to the regular SLA surface after 2 weeks of healing. But the apposition after healing, but the same apposition is found after 4 weeks, with an increased apposition between 2 and 4 weeks. So what I mean to say is that you will see maximum apposition that is happening between the 2nd and the 4 weeks. So therefore, the modified SLA implants, may benefit patients who are undergoing early loading protocols. The next surface, this is something that all of us use these days, which is the anodized surface. Now, we know that anodized surface is nothing but a partial crystalline. It's a phosphate-enriched titanium oxide, which is characterized by a microstructured surface with open pores in a low micrometer range. And you know that it's very typical surface that is seen. It's not like any of the surfaces. You basically see some pores on the surface of the implant if you're viewing it under scanning electron microscope. As all of us know, anodization or it's an electrochemical process which is carried out in an electrolyte. So the fact that it is carried out in an electrolyte is very beneficial because depending on the composition of the electrolyte, you can have anions that are being integrated into the oxide layer. Like if you can integrate anions like phosphorus, calcium, and magnesium. Now, phosphorus is said to promote early molecular events, and it's supposed to help in immune inflammation, while calcium and magnesium are said to improve the TOC values. So you can basically, tailor-make your implant with any of these anions if you're going to use an anodized surface. So when implants are placed in the electrolyte solution, what happens is at a lower voltage, which is below the dielectric breakpoint, you get a constant oxide going over it, okay? But when the voltage is increased, what happens is there is an increased gas evolution. There is basically bubbling that happens, making the surface oxide very porous. So what you see on the anodized surface, the pores that you see on the anodized surface is typically because of the increased gas evolution, because of the bubbling that has happened, because the manufacturer has increased the voltage there, right? So now going on to the next surface, which is the laser modified surface. Now in this, the laser is kind of used as a micro machining tool to produce a three-dimensional structure at the micrometer and the nanometer level. Now this technique, it basically creates roughness, and it is a method of choice when you're using implants with complex geometries, like geometrically complex biomedical implants, for example. So the laser machining process, it creates micro and nanostructure roughness. And usually the lasing for dental implants, the lasing is done only the inner portion of the thread, because the inner portion of the thread is believed to be more stable for bone formation than the outer portion of the thread. So it means that the valley and parts of the flank of the implant threads are laced, while the remaining part is left machined. So the idea behind this design is that the flank portion of the thread, which is at a higher risk to be exposed to microorganisms and plaque, has a smooth surface, that is, you do not do anything to it, which is going to help us minimize the incidence of, say, periimplantitis. Whereas the valley part of the threads will have a rough surface. So you can actually tailor make it. You can apply the laser in areas that you want to. And since it's laser light, it can reach even the intricate areas of the geometrically complex implant design. And then let's go on to the additive techniques. So in this, we have first the titanium plasma sprayed. So what is plasma spraying? So plasma spraying is nothing but a thermal spraying process that basically utilizes high energy heat source to melt and to accelerate fine particles onto a prepared surface. Now, when you're kind of blasting the molten particles onto the surface of the implant, it goes and sticks onto it, and when the droplets cool down and it solidifies, you have a surface that is formed by a process termed as accumulation, which thereby leads to a coating. So this results in a surface which is irregularly shaped, which has pores and crevices and valleys and pits, with a surface area which is increasing to more than 600%. So the roughness in the hydroxyapatite. Okay, now let's go on to the hydroxyapatite coated implants. So the roughness that you find in the hydroxyapatite coated implants is kind of similar to that of the titanium sprayed implants. But if you see the functional area, it is much more. So you see a direct bond, to the bone in hydroxyapatite coated implants, and that's mainly because of the gap healing, which is enhanced because of the contact osteogenesis. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. So the strength of the hydroxyapatite to the bone interface is greater than titanium to bone, and it is much greater than titanium plasma sprayed to bone. So the hydroxyapatite coated implants is considered as a bioactive surface because of the consequence of events that result in the formation of a calcium phosphate rich layer on the surface through a solid solution ion exchange. However, there are some concerns regarding these coatings, which include microbial adhesion because the surface is very rough, and you could also have osseous breakdown, and most importantly, something that's really a concern for many clinicians, and also a reason why many clinicians have stopped using the hydroxyapatite coated implants, is the failure of the coating itself. Okay, so when do we use the hydroxyapatite coated implants? Now we have different types of bone. We have the type 1, the type 2, type 3, and the type 4. Now for the type 1 and the type 2 bone, it offers greater strength. However, because of the density of the bone, when the implant is inserted into the bone, there is an increased risk of the material flaking off from the implant. Now, as far as the type 3 bone is concerned, it is weaker than the type 4 bone, and the advantage of coating basically overweighs its disadvantages. But as far as the type 4 bone is concerned, we know that the type 4 is proven to be the one which is most at risk, and therefore the coating will be highly beneficial in this type of bone. So the problems encountered with hydroxyapatite coatings is a lot. So in order to overcome the disadvantages of the hydroxyapatite coatings, researchers have come up with various other techniques, basically to prevent dissolution and to prevent some kind of a flaking that happens from the surface. So one such technique is the biomimetic precipitation. So this is a method wherein the coating is precipitated on the implant surface. So basically what it does is that the hydroxyapatite and other calcium phosphate is deposited on substrates in simulated body fluids under physiological conditions of an ideal temperature and pH. Okay, so the classical biomimetic calcium phosphate coating, it normally requires an immersion of about 14 to 28 days. And it's important that, with a replenishment of simulated body fluids, what I mean to say is that there has to be a constant replenishment of the simulated body fluids. So it is also observed that the thickness of the appetite layer increases as the immersion period increases. So it can be tailor-made. You can plan and you can decide as to how much, the manufacturer can plan and decide as to how much thickness of appetite layer needs to go on the implant surface. So another technique of applying the hydroxyapatite is called the Sol gel coated implants. Now, this is a low-cost technique, which is a simple procedure used to deposit homogeneous chemical compositions on surfaces, especially on large dimensions and complex designs. So the Sol gel method is basically capable of enhancing the chemical homogeneity in the production of hydroxyapatite coating to a high level. It is also proven to show better results as far as osseointegration is concerned, with no adverse effects at all. There have been some, bioactive osteogenic drugs too that have been incorporated into dental implants in an attempt to improve and accelerate osseointegration. One such drug is bisphosphonates, and all of us know that bisphosphonate increases the bone density. So it's one such drug. Another drug that has been tried is the simvastatin. So statins, it belongs to the group of statins. Statins, as we know, is a drug that is used to reduce the serum cholesterol, which is known to increase the quantity of cancerous bone, and not just increase the quantity of cancerous bone, but it also improves the compressive strength of the bone. So researchers have found that simvastatin is something which can be used. It can help in promoting bone formation by inducing the expression of bone morphogenic proteins. They've also tried an antibiotic, which is tetracycline. Now, incorporating them in the surface, obviously, it would kill the microorganism because it's an antibiotic. And it will also remove the smear layer. It can also increase the proliferation of the cells and inhibit any kind of collagenase activity, and hence promoting bone healing. They've also tried a proline-rich synthetic peptide-coated implants, which has also been researched, but they have shown very promising results, but they have not tried it on human beings as yet. Yeah, so next we go on to the nanotubes. I'm not going to speak much about this because this is still being researched. So nanotubes is certainly the future of implants. And this is one technology that looks very promising. So as we know, nanotubes have long been used as drug delivery systems. So the titanium oxide nanotubes, they typically range between 150 to 200 nanometers. Sorry, there's a mistake in that. And it can be tailored through anodization. So these are basically, sub-microscopic structures which possibly increase osseointegration. So nanotubes seem to be a promising method for the future of implant dentistry due to its low cost, its flexibility in manufacturing, and also, most importantly, with the possibility of usage as a drug delivery system. So, titanium implants have been widely used, but because of its potential immunologic and possible aesthetic compromises, zirconia implants have been introduced into the market as an alternative to titanium implants. And we know that zirconia implants, has its own advantages of it has its ability to transmit light. It is aesthetic, that is, it has an ivory color. It has a high degree of biocompatibility, much better than that of titanium. It's radio opaque, so on and so forth. So coated or surface modified zirconia implants have shown higher removal torque values than machined zirconia implants. However, we need more randomized control trials to give it the status of the titanium implants. So the surface modifications that have been tried on zirconia is they have tried sintering of particles, they've used nanotechnology, they've used sandblasting. They've also used lasers to basically engrave a 3D pattern. So that completes my talk. And so I would like to conclude by stating that, despite the technological development of biomaterials, The ideal surface roughness for biomaterials is, it's still a challenge. So typically dental implants are successful in healthy patients. On the other hand, technological innovation such as surface nano roughness is needed to, accelerate osseointegration in medically compromised individuals. These are my references. Thank you. So I would like to once again thank the organizers for all their efforts in organizing this, during the unprecedented time that we are in. It has been an amazing show, and congratulations to all of you. And I pray that all of you are safe, and thank you one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aparna. It was a wonderful lecture.
Thank
And
you.
I am sure everybody must have enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for enlightening us with the different surfaces, because we all know that it's the surface of the implant which makes a contact with the bone, and osseointegration happens only if the surface is conducive to that.
Right.
So,
thank you.
And with the present scenario of shifting from delayed loading to early loading, I think surface has a lot of role to play. So thank you so much for giving us such an informative lecture.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Anjali. Thank you.
Hello.
May I?
Yes, ma'am. Say. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I think the organizers want to say something.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, please go on.
First of all, I'm extremely sorry, ma'am. I forgot to introduce our keynote speaker. So I would like our chairperson, Dr. Anjali, to kindly do the honors.
Yeah,
it was okay because I thought you introduced me, so it's okay.
That's completely okay, because बड़े-बड़े देशों में छोटी-छोटी बातें होती रहती है.
Sorry,
and I congratulate Dr. Aparna for a flawless lecture. And this, as a formality, I would like to introduce Dr. Aparna. We had seen her logo of Manipal Mahe in the presentation throughout. So I know that her lineage, but to formally introduce Dr. Aparna, she is currently working as professor in the Department of Prosthodontics, MPODS, Manipal. And she's also acting as a director of planning and monitoring in Mahe in Manipal. She has done her BDS from College of Dental Surgery, Manipal, and also her post-graduation from the same institute in 1998. She has many scientific collaborations to her credit. She has received a fellowship from International Congress of Oral Implantologists. And in the year 2012, she has been awarded for her poster on identification and characterization of salivary proteins on titanium abutments on an in vivo mode at 20th Anniversary Congress of Dental Implantology in Birmingham, United Kingdom. So a short CV, I am pretty sure that she has a long CV to match up to what she has presented today. And I really congratulate you for the flawless presentation, the meticulous slide preparation, and the information you have provided, madam.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harinder. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, ma'am, for your valuable time. Please accept this token of appreciation from our side.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Have a good day, all of you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
I congratulate and thank the organizers, Dr. Narendra Padiar, Dr. Gaurav, and Dr. Pragati. It's a wonderful effort, and thanks for bringing the fest of this knowledge to our homes. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, organizers. Thank you, Dr. Harvinder, for co-chairing the session with me. Thank you,
Dr. Anjali. Thank you.